Ever get that feeling your brain is buffering while the world seems to be falling apart? A low, quiet hum of dread that sits just under the surface of everything. You scroll through headlines about political meltdowns, climate emergencies, and economies doing, well, whatever that is, and one part of your brain feels weirdly detached, like you're watching a movie. Another part is screaming into a pillow. If you've ever felt like the whole system has a weird rattle it didn't used to have, you are definitely not alone. This one's for you. In an age of nonstop 24/7 crisis on demand, most of us aren't just reacting to the events themselves. We're buckling under the emotional weight of knowing too much, too fast, all the time. The result is a quiet pattern, a cycle that takes us from disbelief to burnout. So, we're going to break down a 5-stage framework that explains why you feel the way you do. From the brain's protective denial to the hollowed-out exhaustion of feeling nothing at all. Now, this isn't some official list from a textbook, like the stages of grief. Think of it more as a psychological field guide for navigating chronic uncertainty. These are the ways our minds try to cope when the world feels like it's cracking at the seams. By putting a name to them, we can start to understand ourselves a little better, and maybe find a way back to feeling like we're in the driver's seat again. The first and maybe most automatic response to a threat that feels too big is denial. It's the mind's pop-up shield, its first line of defense against a reality that's just too much to take in all at once. Denial isn't about being ignorant. It's not that you don't see the headlines or hear the reports. Instead, denial is when your brain refuses to connect the dots and accept what that information actually means. It's that little voice inside that says, "It's not that bad," or, "Oh, the media is just blowing it up for clicks." It's the impulse to change the channel when a grim story comes on, not because you're bored, but because the emotional price of watching feels way too high. On a bigger scale, it's our collective habit of looking away, of focusing on our immediate daily lives, because facing the sheer size of the problem feels paralyzing. So why do our brains do this? Psychologically, denial is a defense mechanism built for one thing: immediate stress relief. When a threat feels too massive or complicated, denial buys us time. It's a buffer, letting us slowly adjust instead of getting swallowed whole. Some evolutionary psychologists even think this was a key survival trait for our ancestors, helping them stay focused on hunting and gathering instead of having a constant existential crisis. In the short term, denial can be a necessary tool. It lets us get out of bed, go to work, and take care of business even with the world's background noise set to a dull roar. The trouble starts when denial sticks around and becomes a long-term strategy. While it shields us from pain, it also stops us from adapting or problem-solving. It creates a state of cognitive dissonance, that itchy, uncomfortable feeling you get when you believe one thing: the world is stable, but see evidence of the exact opposite. To get rid of that itch, it's often just easier to dismiss the evidence. Think of it like hearing a weird, faint scratching in the walls of your house. At first, you ignore it. It's just the pipes, you tell yourself. It's easier than thinking about a massive pest problem. Denial is turning up the TV to drown out the scratching. For a while, it works, but the noise is still there. Deep down, you know ignoring it won't make it go away. In the context of the world, denial is just turning up the volume on distractions to avoid hearing the deep structural creaks in the foundation. It's a temporary peace, and the price is awareness. When the cracks in the walls get too big to ignore, the mind often pivots from denial to a smarter, more sophisticated defense: rationalization. This is when we stop saying, "This isn't happening," and start saying, "It's happening, but here's why it's actually fine, or at least not my problem." Rationalization is a classic defense mechanism where we cook up logical-sounding excuses to justify our feelings or our inaction, all while hiding the real, more painful reason: we're scared. If denial is plugging your ears, rationalization is writing a brilliant 20-page essay on why the sound you're hearing is historically insignificant. It's an attempt to tame the wild, messy emotion of fear by dressing it up in the clean, orderly language of logic. And it can sound a lot like wisdom. We start saying things like, "Well, Every generation throughout history has thought their world was ending. This is nothing new. Or, humanity always innovates its way out of trouble. Tech will solve it. Another popular one is passing the buck. If it were really that bad, the people in charge would be doing something. Or the one that guarantees you do nothing. The problem is so huge that anything I do is just a drop in the ocean, so what's the point? These statements aren't always wrong. History does have cycles and human ingenuity is a real thing. But when they're used as rationalizations, their job isn't to find the truth. It's to make us feel better. It's a way to feel smart, informed, and in control without actually having to carry the emotional weight of it all. This stage is sneaky because it feels like you're engaged. You might binge read articles and watch documentaries that explain why everything is going wrong. But all this learning doesn't lead to action. It leads to a detached, academic understanding. You become an expert on the specifics of our decline, able to debate the finer points of geopolitical chess or supply chain failures. But this expertise just keeps the crisis at a safe, intellectual distance. It's an object of study, not a fire in your kitchen. Let's go back to that ship taking on water. Denial was pretending it's not sinking. Rationalization is pulling up a deck chair, timing the rate the water is rising with a stopwatch, and debating the principles of buoyancy with other passengers while the water pools around your ankles. You feel smart. You feel informed. You're engaging with the problem, but you're not patching the hole or looking for a lifeboat. This process lets us feel informed without feeling responsible. We convince ourselves that understanding is a form of doing. But understanding without action is just surrender in a tweed jacket. It's a very human response to feeling powerless. But like denial, it's a temporary comfort that keeps us from facing the truth. Some problems require more than just our analysis. They require us to get our hands dirty. Sooner or later, the intellectual walls of rationalization start to crumble. The water on that sinking ship is no longer at your ankles. It's at your knees. And that's when the raw, unfiltered emotional reality of the threat floods in. This is stage 3, anxiety. Anxiety is what happens when your brain's defenses are finally breached, and your nervous system starts treating the chronic global threat like an immediate personal one. The problem is no longer an abstract idea to be debated. It's a feeling in your gut. It's the knot in your stomach when you check the news. It's the racing thoughts at 3 a.m., playing out worst-case scenarios on a loop. It can show up as a constant sense of dread, making you more irritable, less patient, and unable to focus. This is the stage of hypervigilance, your brain's ancient threat detection system, the one that helped our ancestors spot tigers in the grass, is now going haywire in a world of infinite scrolling threats. It's constantly scanning for danger, but these dangers, political instability, ecological collapse, are huge, shapeless, and have no end in sight. The result is a state of chronic stress. Your nervous system's fight-or-flight response, which is supposed to be a short-term burst of adrenaline, gets stuck in the on position. Over time, your body gets flooded with stress hormones like cortisol, which leads to total mental and physical exhaustion. This stage is often defined by an intolerance of uncertainty. Our brains are wired to crave predictability, but modern crises are anything but predictable. We don't know the exact timeline of events. We can't know the precise outcome. This not knowing is deeply unsettling, and it can drive us to seek a feeling of control anywhere we can find it. This isn't a personal failing or a sign that you're too sensitive. It's a perfectly logical response to a genuinely alarming situation. It's the fire alarm in your head finally getting the attention it deserves after being ignored and explained away. Studies from events like the COVID-19 pandemic have shown that the more negative news people consume, the higher their levels of anxiety and distress. Some research found that even a few minutes of bad news can tank a person's mood. When that's a daily habit, it's no surprise anxiety becomes the new normal. Living in the anxiety stage feels like being on high alert 24/7. Every notification on your phone can feel like a jolt of adrenaline. You might find yourself catastrophizing, where a single headline about the economy sends you spiraling into fears of personal ruin and societal collapse. It's exhausting. You're trapped between knowing the danger is real and feeling powerless to stop it. That feeling of powerlessness is key. The ship is clearly sinking. You feel the cold water and you realize you have no idea how to fix it. The alarms are blaring, but you feel trapped on the deck, and that desperation for control, for any action to take, leads straight to the next stage. Quick pause for a second. If you've been sitting there quietly thinking, "Yeah, this is exactly what my brain feels like lately," then you're probably the kind of person this channel was built for. So if these videos help you put words to the strange tension of modern life, consider subscribing. Not for panic, not for outrage, just for honest conversations about the psychology of living through uncertain times. Now let's keep going, because the next stage is where things start getting dangerous. The feeling of being powerless mixed with the high-octane fuel of anxiety creates the perfect storm for stage 4, obsession. This isn't a clinical diagnosis, but a compulsive mental fixation on the crisis. It's the desperate attempt to get back a sense of control by knowing everything. It's the birth of the doomscroller. In this stage, your brain is running on a dangerous illusion that if you just have enough information, you'll be safe. The logic seems sound. If I can just understand the problem from every angle, track every update, and read every analysis, I'll be prepared. I won't be caught by surprise, so you scroll. So, you refresh the feed, open another tab and start another podcast. You chase information down rabbit holes, learning the intricate details of political scandals, the precise parts per million of atmospheric carbon, or the subtle signs of the next recession. This is a form of reassurance seeking, but it backfires spectacularly. You're looking for that one piece of information that will finally calm you down. But the internet isn't designed to give you peace. It's designed to keep you engaged, and fear and outrage are powerful tools for engagement. So instead of finding relief, you just find more reasons to be anxious. The search for reassurance becomes a machine that creates more distress. Psychologically, your brain's threat detection system is stuck in a feedback loop. Our natural negativity bias, our tendency to focus more on bad news, glues us to the screen. Each alarming headline gives us a little jolt of arousal that feels like engagement, like control. But research is clear. Instead of making us feel empowered, obsessive doom scrolling is strongly linked to higher anxiety, depression, and hopelessness. It overloads your brain, leaving no room for actual problem solving, and it warps your perception of reality. The curated feed of disaster on your screen starts to feel more real than the world outside your window. You might become the expert on collapse among your friends, able to cite statistics and predict the next disaster. But this expertise comes at a huge cost. It isolates you from people who seem blissfully unaware. It exhausts you, messes with your sleep, and keeps you in a state of low-grade emergency. Some studies have found that doom scrolling at work, for example, leads to distraction and a spiral of negative thoughts. Let's go back to the person on the sinking ship. In the obsession stage, they're not just watching the water anymore. They're running around with a ruler, measuring the water level in every corner, charting its progress on a graph, and shouting the updated stats to anyone who will listen. They're incredibly busy. They feel like they're doing something, but all their activity is mental. They are mapping the disaster, not stopping it. The illusion of control you get from information becomes a trap, and the inevitable burnout leads to the final, and maybe the most unsettling, stage of all. After the frantic, exhausting loops of anxiety and obsession, your mind and body can only take so much. When the nervous system has been redlining for that long, it can flip a switch into a final, desperate act of self-preservation. This is stage 5, emotional numbness. This is the stage where you look at a headline about a horrible tragedy or a dire scientific report, and you feel nothing. Just a blank space where the fear, sadness, or rage used to be. It's a deep, profound sense of detachment and exhaustion. The voice in your head goes from, "This is terrifying," to, "I just can't care anymore." It's really important to understand that this numbness isn't the same as being a bad person or genuinely not caring. It's the psychological equivalent of a circuit breaker tripping. When the electrical load gets too high for too long, The system shuts down to prevent a fire. Emotional numbness is that shutdown. It's a collapse response, the direct result of burnout and compassion fatigue. Your emotional bandwidth has been maxed out. Researchers like Paul Slovic call this psychic numbing. They've seen it in response to every kind of massive crisis, from genocide to the threat of nuclear war. When suffering happens on a scale that's too big to comprehend, our ability to feel empathy gets overwhelmed. As we see in climate change communication, when the numbers, square miles of forest burned, tons of ice melted, get too big, a sense of indifference can kick in. This numbing is directly tied to feeling like you can't do anything about it. When you feel powerless to help, a part of your mind just stops feeling because feeling that much pain without any ability to act is unbearable. This stage can be deeply unsettling. You might judge yourself for not reacting to things that once would have made you cry. You might feel disconnected from your own life, like you're watching a movie of yourself going through the motions. This is a form of dissociation, a protective break from reality. The crisis feels too huge and abstract to register emotionally anymore. On our sinking ship, this is the passenger who is no longer panicking or measuring the water. They are sitting quietly in a deck chair, watching the waves with a flat, vacant look. The alarms are still ringing, but they don't really hear them anymore. They know the ship is sinking. They're not in denial or rationalizing it. They are just too tired to be anxious or obsessed. They have accepted it with a profound, hollow exhaustion. On a societal level, this is probably the most dangerous stage. While anxiety is painful, it still contains the energy of concern. Numbness is the absence of that energy. It's the quiet resignation that comes right before total inaction. But it doesn't have to be a permanent state. Recognizing this numbness for what it is, a symptom of exhaustion, not a moral failure, is the first step toward finding a way back. Going through these stages, from denial's false hope to the flat line of numbness, can feel like a one-way trip to despair. But this framework isn't meant to be a map to your doom. It's just a map of the territory. And once you know where you are, you can start to chart a course somewhere else. The way forward isn't about finding a magic fix for the world's problems. It's about getting back in the driver's seat of your own head and finding a sustainable way to live in a messy world. The journey starts with giving yourself a break. Recognize that these stages aren't character flaws. They are deeply human, predictable responses to an overwhelming situation. You're not weak for feeling numb or silly for having been in denial. This is just a mind trying to protect itself. The next step is to consciously change your relationship with information. The obsession stage proves that endless information doesn't create control. It creates burnout. So put your brain on an information diet. Choose a few reliable sources. Set specific, limited times to check in. Maybe once in the morning, once in the evening. Don't let the crisis become the 24/7 soundtrack to your life. When you do engage, ask yourself, is this information new? Is it actionable for me? Or is this just emotional junk food designed to keep me scrolling? With that new mental space, you can turn your focus inward and learn to regulate your own nervous system. The anxiety and obsession stages are states of chronic fight or flight. To counteract this, you have to intentionally do things that tell your body it's safe. It doesn't have to be complicated. Go for a short walk and just pay attention to the feeling of your feet on the ground. Practice simple breathing exercises. Prioritize sleep and turn off the news alerts at night. This isn't about ignoring the world's problems. It's about making sure you're stable enough to face them without collapsing. Maybe the most powerful antidote to all this despair is to turn that free-floating anxiety into focused action. Powerlessness drives this whole cycle. Action is the cure. This doesn't mean you personally have to solve climate change. It means finding your sphere of influence, however small, and doing something there. Donate to a cause. Volunteer locally. Call a representative. Have a real conversation with someone in your life. The key is to shift from being a passive spectator to an active participant. When you take action, you send a message back to your own nervous system. I am not helpless. Finally, find your people. These stages thrive in isolation. When you're alone in your bunker with your fear, it feels infinite. But when you talk about it with trusted friends or family, the fear often shrinks. You realize you're not the only one who feels this way. The goal isn't to get rid of fear. Fear is an appropriate response. The goal is to keep fear from turning into paralysis. It's about finding that narrow path between being overwhelmed and being checked out. By managing our information, regulating our bodies, taking small, meaningful actions, and connecting with others, we stop being passive observers of a world falling apart and start being active builders of the world we want to see, right where we stand. So we've walked through a psychological landscape that's probably pretty familiar. The shield of denial, the clever excuses of rationalization, the raw fear of anxiety, the frantic scrolling of obsession, and the deep exhaustion of numbness. These aren't steps on a path to certain doom. They're a cycle our minds get stuck in when trying to process a world that feels like it's in permanent crisis mode. Understanding this pattern is the key to breaking it. Knowing these are common defense mechanisms lets us stop beating ourselves up for feeling them and start taking real steps to move through them. The challenge for all of us is to stay engaged with a difficult reality without letting it break us. It's about learning to hold both the darkness of the moment and the light of our own power to act. The real task is to keep the pressure from turning into paralysis, and to find purpose not in spite of the world's problems, but in direct response to them. What stage do you see yourself in most often? And what helps you get your feet back on the ground when you feel overwhelmed? Share your own field notes in the comments below. Hearing each other's stories is how we remember we're not in this alone. If this resonated with you, consider liking and subscribing for more guides to the psychology of our wild world. And if you know someone who's wrestling with these feelings, share this video. It might just help them find their map. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay prepared, and see you in the next video.